Hello and welcome to another episode of Tea Time with Tegan. I am your host, Tegan, and we're going to be talking about Crisis on Leviathan, critical episodes in the growth of American government. This will be the first installment of this video series and probably part one of two. Next video being released Thursday or this weekend. So this book is extremely dense and a bit hard to read, so I'm going to dive right into this and I'm going to try to keep it as understandable as I can. But there's going to be some complexity to it, so I'm going to be reading a lot from my notes. I'm sorry if I can't maintain eye contact. So with that being said, grab yourself a cup of tea and let's get started. This tea is nothing but hot leaf juice.
That's what all tea is.
Yes, that's right. I'm going to be making all sorts of zany and wacky references to cartoons I love because I want this to be fun for both myself and you guys, while keeping a somewhat more serious tone. So, this chapter is explanations for growth, or the government growth. Talking about multiple hypotheses for why the government is as big as it is, because no matter what your political views, I'm sure we can all agree that the government has grown far beyond what it was originally intended to be back in the 1700s with our founding fathers. They laid out exactly what it should be in our Constitution. We've gone a bit beyond that. Now, whether or not that's a good thing is up to you. I'm going to try to keep my views out of it as much as I can, which is going to be a bit hard to do, but I'll try. So the first hypothesis is the modernization hypothesis. A modern urban industrial economy must have an extensive action from the government. Subscribers claim that modern industrial urbanization and the economy is too complex without government involvement. So what they're saying here is that the government grew in order to regulate the economy as the economy has grown so large. Quote from Calvin Hoover: "The increased complexities and interrelationships of modern life necessitate this extension of the powers of the state." Now, Higgs disagrees with this on principle. He cites Adam Smith and Friedrich Hayek's work in the free market, as well as government failure in the 70s to organize economic activities. Two examples they gave of that were the artificial gas line shortages, which is the failure of the government, and the work with Adam Smith and Friedrich Hayek has demonstrated that there's a general dissatisfaction in socialist countries where the economy is greatly controlled by the government. That is what Adam Smith and Friedrich Hayek were talking about a lot. They are very pro-free market economy. Now, some claim with the rise of large corporations that government grew to, quote, hold the pernicious, irresponsible powers in check, which is a valid concern, given corporations seeming to have monopolies at the time of the theory's origin. People feared that with monopolies there would be no more competition and small businesses would be trampled upon by the large ones, which I guess would be a valid concern, but Higgs refused this, saying that the argument is weak in both theory and fact. Even with numerous mergers in the face of giants such as American Tobacco or United States Steel, no one has established that the economy became less competitive. Go on to state that while the true large companies and corporations seek a monopoly, it is rare for them to hold on to one for an extended period of time. Quoting, "The decisive aspects of competition are dynamic, chiefly technology and organizational innovation." So what he's talking about here is that even if there is a monopoly on a service, let's take taxis for example, only certain people are allowed to have taxis, as they have to have what's called a medallion, which is a special license, and there's only so many permitted to each city. So to get a medallion, someone else has to give up their medallion. But companies like Uber and Lyft go around this by creating a ride-sharing service, which essentially undermines the monopoly and creates new competition. We have now the start of one company, now we have multiple companies all doing this ride-sharing thing, all trying to one-up each other and doing it the best way possible. And that is basically what the free market is all about. Different people trying to one-up each other and providing the best service. So essentially it turns self-interest into public service, because you want to make money, and if you want to make money, you have to provide the best service. Anyway, so Higgs is very skeptical of government regulations, quoting the Nobel Prize-winning economist George Stigler, quote, "Regulation and competition are rhetorical friends and deadly enemies," end quote. So Stigler doesn't like regulation agencies. He goes on to denounce all of them, but he's particularly nasty to the Federal Trade Commission and the Antitrust Division. So, in summary, he's skeptical to place the blame on the modernization hypothesis as, quote, "most government activities have no plausible connection to the increased complexity of the economy." So, no one can prove that the complexity of the economy is exactly why we need large government. So that's one hypothesis done. The next one is the public goods one. Now, you might be thinking, so what is a public good? Well, a public good is, according to Higgs, not one that is simply or necessarily one supplied by the government. It is one that is not rivaled in consumption. So essentially, one person enjoying the public good does not mean other people cannot enjoy the public good. I'm going to be saying public good a lot in this chapter. So Higgs gives the example of the national defense. So my enjoyment of the national defense, meaning that people can't come in and invade our country, doesn't mean that you can't enjoy it. We all enjoy the fact that our government keeps people from invading equally. So, unfortunately, public goods create a problem, as all consumers share benefits fully, each has an incentive to avoid paying for them. It's called the free rider problem. And with private goods, people who will not pay are unable to enjoy it, as those who do pay can't exclude them. Meaning, if I pay for a certain service, I get to decide who gets to enjoy it, which is, I guess, most people assume that's kind of fair. So, although there are certain public goods where excluding non-paying beneficiaries is both impossible and prohibitively costly, meaning you can't have only the people who pay for a public good enjoy it, as it doesn't work that way. Now, Higgs states that in cases like the national defense, everyone benefits equally, but left to provide a non-exclusive public good into the market, people would provide little to nothing, hoping to be the unexcludable free rider. No one would provide anything, or no provisions would be made. So he continues on in saying that while government can break the stalemate by taxing all or most of the beneficiaries, appropriate amounts of taxing is very rarely done correctly and not in a straightforward or practical procedure. So, in conclusion, the public goods hypothesis has some merit, but it cannot entirely explain why our government is so large now. Let's see, already at 6 minutes, so we're doing pretty good time-wise. We're going to cover 2 more, and hopefully that'll be enough time. So the next one is the welfare state hypothesis. The welfare state has not simply developed, or the United States has not simply developed a large government, but a welfare state. Quote from Higgs there. So the welfare state is essentially the modernization hypothesis, but in a more cohesive manner. It's a better explanation of the gargantuan size of the government. So essentially, rapid economic growth and concurrent socioeconomic transference have indirectly diminished the social service roles initially played by private institutions like family, church, and other voluntary associations. So what they're saying, or people like Victor Fuchs, an American economist, is saying that because the economy has grown so rapidly, it's gotten rid of the need for church or family as the provider of social services. But in that absence, Fuchs states that the government rushes in to fill the vacuum. And essentially, big government becomes a substitute for those institutions. And while Higgs agrees that government has been substituted for private social services, it fails to explain suitably that, or it fails to explain how saying that one needs to know who benefits and who pays and in what ways. So Higgs finds that while the theory has some merit under Fuchs, it fails to explain everything. He then cites another economist, a Swiss one, who's Wilhelm Ropke, Ropke. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any names here. I'm doing my best. So government social service to be a tool of social revolution where taking is at least as important as giving. That's what the social services have become. Everyone is trying to take as much as they can, or at least the people who rely on it, and very few people want to pay for it because there's so many people taking from it, with them people paying not really benefiting from it. So while Higgs agrees that government social programs seem to exist arbitrarily and distribute wealth among all people of all classes, it fails to account for the vast expense of the government power. He agrees that basically, yes, this is one of the reasons, but it's not the main reason. The next one he goes on for a few pages about is the political redistribution theory. So this is a bit of a tough one, so strap in. Alright, so the political redistribution hypothesis is an explanation of how the state rushes in to fill the vacuum that Fuchs described. So this hypothesis sees government as, quote, an instrument of coercive redistribution. The general voter sees the general voter as knowledgeable and narrowly self-interested, and portrays elected officials as sensitive and responsive to messages from those they govern. Yeah, that's a bit of a hard quote. So basically what they're saying is the general voter is very knowledgeable about what they're voting on and not very self-interested, as well as the government is very responsive to our demands as those governed. Now, there are multiple interpretations of this theory. Two that he cites are the Meltzer and Rich's version, which we're going to go over right now, where growth results from the difference between the distribution of voters and income. And so Higgs finds that this explanation does not fit history and facts well at all and doesn't like it. So he moves on quickly past that and on to the second one he goes over, which is the Peltzman version, which claims that government grows where groups which share a common interest in that growth can perceive and articulate that interest becoming more numerous. Meaning growth comes from the demands of the citizens exclusively, taking government responses for granted, holding belief that the leveling of income is a major source for the growth of government. So basically, the government grows because people demand it to grow, and these people are very knowledgeable in government policies, so it's a good thing that they grow. Now, let's see. Yeah, this assumption assumes, I don't know why I wrote that. It's kind of redundant. Anyway, that each voter completely understands the details as well as the implication of policies. Now, this is untrue. It's very there's no way that this is true in today's society or in historical context. In general, people don't know what they're voting on. There are some people who do know what they're voting on, and there's some people who think they know what they're voting on, but if you haven't actually read the policies, you probably don't know what the policies actually are. And that's what happens in America. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that is happening. So, unlike other hypotheses mentioned, the redistribution explicitly views government growth as a product of political actions. Now, political actions, described as Higgs, are seeking or wielding coercive powers of government in order to determine who gets what. This perspective is indispensable, but often falsely portrays politics, assuming that government growth is only determined by officials seeking re-election, and it neglects to account for public officials who stay in office their whole lives once they've been elected, much like the... hold on one moment. This assumption falsely claims that government size is determined exclusively by officials seeking re-election, neglecting to factor in permanent public officials like the Supreme Court. another faulty assumption is, quote, or is a fully informed voter's quote, to assume that the average voter is completely ignorant would approximate the truth more closely. Americans can more readily name their astrological sign than their representative in Congress. Now, when I read this originally, I was dumbfounded by this. I was like, whoa, this is right. I know my astrological sign much more readily than I know my representative in Congress, who is, in fact, Tom McClintock. So I went around my campus last week on Monday and Tuesday, and I interviewed 100 people. Now, I did mess up with my interview here. I only accounted for 2 categories, where people who know their zodiac sign and people who can name their representative. I should have created a 3rd category for someone who knows both. So I also only interviewed 100 people, which is a very small sample size. It is not indicative of the rest of the population on campus. But it's still a good idea, as I got a very random sampling. So out of the 100 people, only 81 could name their zodiac sign. Only 27 could name a California representative. I didn't even specify that was theirs. It was just any representative in Congress from California. Only 27% of the people interviewed. And that's a bit shocking to me. So now, Higgs goes on for a few other paragraphs listing examples of political actions and how they take place in a, quote, environment of ignorance, misinformation, posturing, and heated emotions. Now, if you actually look at our society today, especially in our media, this is absolutely true. If you just watch for 5 minutes, all this is ignorance, misinformation, posturing, and very much heated emotions on both sides of the aisle. Both Democrats and Republicans are guilty of doing this. And he finds that ideologically motivated actions may drive the course of political actions more than a redistribution hypothesis. But for that, you have to tune in to my next video, most likely on Thursday or on this weekend. But so far, what did you like about this video? What did I do that you didn't like? Please let me know how I can make this better for you guys. Any comments you want to give me, or tips, or what made you think? I want to see discussions in these comments, because that is what this series is for, so that we can learn and then discuss these ideas in a very respectful environment. So, thank you very much. Click that like button if you enjoyed this. I very much appreciate if you subscribed. Have a good one.